Tell me when. Welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and tonight I am hanging out with this bad guy.
Nerdarchus Dave, what's going on?
Nothing.
I got the pate going, so I could be like a bad guy for sure.
Yeah. Unless you you don't have an iPhone either, so you can't be a bad guy.
Do you need an iPhone?
You can be a bad guy.
Oh, that's right.
Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I think I heard about it from you. Like they're like iPhone won't let anyone use an iPhone if it's being used by a bad guy.
Yep, in a media.
That just seems like a bad guy move.
That's what. That's how people. Spoiler alert. That's how people figured out. Like Sharon Carter was not who she was saying. There's more to her character than because she did not use an iPhone in Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I mean, really, who uses his iPhone anyway? I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
Me either.
Look. I got off the iPhone.
Unless you're going to use it to get the Nerdarchy dice rolling app, then you should totally go for an iPhone.
Yeah, I mean that was unfortunate. We never did get the Android version.
Yeah,
but I got off the iPhone and I never went back. And then my family, right, always come to me with their iPhone problems. I'm like, I don't know nothing about no iPhone. Go talk to Steve Jobs.
I'm just not a big Apple. I've never been a big Apple.
There's a hilarious video with this guy talking about the iPhone and just ripping on iPhone users. And about how nothing changes when they upgrade to the new version of iPhone.
Oh, the actual phone.
Yeah, it's like they always just resell you. They just resell you. They just resell you the same phone.
Yeah. So this topic was bad guys. In case anybody missed that, I like to work those into my version of the intro. Is the topic this week?
It's your monologue.
Yes, and spoilers. Next week will probably be good, guys. You probably win that bet if you took it. But you picked this one. So did you have any sort of particular impetus for it?
I feel like as a game master, as a DM, that's where I start, right? With the bad guys. Okay. And because then like once you have the bad guy, it's like, well, what are they trying to do? What's going on that's mucking with the players and creating problems for them. And also like my games are also very open. So like I may introduce several bad guys, right? And see which one the players really gravitate towards. Because if you can properly slow burn a bad guy in a campaign, like the more things you have them do, the more the players get vested. And the more they really begin to hate the bad guy, and they love to hate the bad guy. And once you get that going on, you just start steamrolling. It's like a snowball going down a mountain, right? Like Ted's campaign that he ran, and when we did the session 0, it was like there was like 3 different things, and like for us to pick from. So we picked one of them, and then in session 0, like we started like putting together how our group knew each other, right? Sure. And it was basically, we all went on the same adventure from the message board, or we were summoned by the cry or whatever, and we were like the 7 that stayed. Everyone else bowed out on the job. Okay. And, we went and did the job because I think like that party started at like level 4. And a big part of it. 7
people in that group?
Yeah, there were 7 people in that group.
That's big.
Man, everyone wants to be in Ted's group. And he's not good at saying no. So, a big part of our session 0 was based around like how we came together, what happened, and the villain, the big bad, right? Okay. And which ended up being the head of this magic academy. And we kind of like got them ousted.
This is all in session 0.
This is all in session 0. So like there was a lot of like, a really good session 0, I feel like has a lot of narrative elements where you get together and you tell a story.
Yeah, there's no real definitive like this is what you do during session 0. I feel like.
Yeah, there definitely isn't. Right. But I feel like if you want to have a session 0 where the players don't feel like they wasted their time, like have them all build the story elements together. And, by the time you get done, it's like, oh, that was a lot of fun. And so, you
you want them to like their characters, and
yeah,
so thinking about like who they are and what they're doing there
and
is
how they're connected.
stuff.
But
And
like,
then when it's all connected by like mutual dislike for the bad guy, that's great. Because it's
yeah,
like
and
then it
that's what
doesn't
we
matter
ended up
what
with.
their
Like,
original like individual backgrounds are. It's like, yeah, but this bad guy, screwed us all over, so we all don't like him.
yeah, so we all ended up hating him. He like, so his lover was some official's husband, right, in town. So he got like jaded and he kidnapped the whole family. And like one of the kids accidentally gets murdered while we're trying to
So like,
free them.
yeah, very easily hateable.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think it was my character's errant crossbow bolt that ends up taking out the kid. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, jeez.
There's tragedy.
Wow. Yeah.
Tragedy
Okay.
rife in that story, which of course only makes me and Ryan's character hate that guy even
Sure.
more. And it's funny because it carried over to the next campaign where some of the players chose to create new characters and some of us decided to continue on with our old characters. And like and like the villain dies at the end of that campaign, right?
The first one.
But the first one, but he like enacts this ritual that breaks the world. So me and Ryan's character, we're still pissed about that guy. So we're like,
Sure.
What can we do to really piss that guy off? And we're like, we're going to figure out how to put the world back together to spite him.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, real heroes would have did it because it's the right thing to do. But our characters were like, maybe not as heroic. And we're like, it would really tick that guy off.
Even superheroic people have some personal stakes too. I mean, that's what makes it cool too, right? It's like, yeah, they do the right thing, but I mean, they probably have their own individual reasons for wanting to do things.
So, I mean, even in Moonrise's game.
Oh yeah, what about, man? That's all I've been thinking about marinara sauce a while.
Yeah.
Like we all thought she was just a straight up B, big time. But that's because you did things that like us as players found distasteful as well. I mean, which is pretty low hanging fruit, like hurting kids, cursing, just harming innocent people. I mean, unless you're an a-hole, it's like, wow, that's pretty low hanging fruit. It's an easy plot hook for any character to hang their hat on, right? It's just like, come on. I mean, even if you're like a cold-blooded killer, it's like,
yeah. And that campaign was a little bit over the top, but still, sure.
That's just true too. That's a good point. You mean your bad guy. It's like, are they literally in that case like a cartoon-esque villain where it's like, yeah, there's no, they're the bad guy. Okay, it's not a deep story.
But
unless we went that way.
The other way to go too is to also make, when you can, make the villains sympathetic as well. I think they make some of the best bad guys. Do you want?
They do in like entertainment media, but I find it's difficult for me to agree with that or get behind that.
You don't have to agree with it. Yeah. You can. Doug, even though you're my employee, you can have any wrong opinion you want.
Oh yeah, I will. I'm just saying I'm not 100% like, yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I know where you're coming from too, because it's like because you probably definitely played with the players and be like, man, you know what? This guy's right. They did screw him over. He's doing horrific things, but you know what? I would do horrific things too. We're going to do horrific things together.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know. I think I maybe was talking to you on the phone the other day. And we were talking about like comic book supervillains because that's an easy analog for villains. I mean, they have crazy powers and stuff. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, even when they're sympathetic, it's important to remember they still do terrible shit. You know what I mean? Like I think Magneto's like a fascinating character. I love him. It's like, but he also like murders innocent people. I mean, nobody's innocent, but you know what I'm saying? Like he'll go way beyond in violence and stuff. And that's why he's a villain. but he is somewhat sympathetic.
We definitely had that conversation.
They still have to be defeated, though, not just like, yeah, or I guess I say that with a grain of salt because it's like, well, even he had people like the Brotherhood and stuff who could have went either way, and they're like, you know what, this guy's right, man. Like they are trying to exterminate our race, so
Yeah. Well,
You
and
know,
also too, like it's not even
an
just that.
asteroid.
It's well that is a huge selling point. But it's not
Yeah,
even just that with the Magneto character, right? But he lived through Auschwitz and through the
yeah,
Germany occupation, and he's seen that and experienced that kind of that
yeah.
level of
And then
evil
seeing it happen
firsthand.
again
Yeah,
against mutants, of which he is one of those also.
yeah.
Like now
But
they got giant robots that are attacking us at the mall and shit.
but then he does like awful terroristic type stuff in order to kind of
Yeah.
make
So
his
let me
point.
ask you,
So
like with Marinara, like I don't even remember her real name. Mariana.
Marina, yeah,
Did you hit
Marina,
Marina, the Merciless? That's right.
yeah.
Did you have like how much of a for lack of a better term, like backstory and stuff? Did you have for her? Like,
I really
did
didn't
you
for
have
that
any
one.
reason like where she got her powers and why she was doing the things she was doing, or no?
I with her, like her goals were really simple. She was just power hungry.
Yeah.
Um and like nothing in the campaign went in a direction to make me explore that too
Right.
much. So I usually leave that stuff open ended. Like I like to fill in the blanks as I go
Mm-hmm.
when they come up. And we just never got to those places. Uh
Right, right. Yeah, because I was gonna say like you said you start with the bad guys. A lot of times I don't in games just because it's like I don't know
yeah.
what they're gonna be interested in. So I just try to think of like the setting and like people that and things that are going on there. So it's like, well, if they do this, that way I kind of like can mold my whatever encounters or just ideas to become the bad guy for whatever the players end up doing.
Yeah, and in her case, it was more like she was like a storm sweeping up all
Yeah.
anyone that got in her path, and you would either bend to her will, or you're going to get crushed, chewed up, and spit out.
What a
Um,
great game. And largely because of a great bad guy, even though we rarely encountered her, it was like, you know, and that was a great example of how to weave that in because it's like, well, we didn't fight her all the time or even her forces all the time, but look, we
yeah,
like saw what she'd done and,
you
and
kind
we
of
kind
saw the
of, we bought the
aftermath.
hook too as players. That's important. We were like, yeah, she's the villain. We're supposed to not like her. You know what I mean? So that made it easy to make a lot of decisions where a lot of times, in any game, you like following like analysis process. Like, we should go here, maybe we should go there. What should we do? What if we do this and that? And it's just like, well, at the end of the day, we got X days till the bad guy does this thing, and we know we want to stop them. So what's the best way to do that?
Um,
And that really kind of I remember the group deliberating for a long time on like what to do at a certain point. And we were just like, well, we went out to get information. We got it. So let's just go back, and
yeah,
that
you
worked.
guys definitely waffled back and forth a couple times, on what we were going to do. And also, that's kind of I like that as well, as far as the players,
Mm-hmm.
like when they're torn about what to do because they've engaged with the content.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
such a fun game.
Yeah. And so Nicholas, the
Right.
encounter in the game were great too. The Nazi surf zombies were cool, and when the little girl transformed into a creature, that was dope. Yeah, I just wanted to have a lot of fun with some really like crazy tropes, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, atomic surf zombie surfers sounds like fun.
Yeah, that was a freaking incredible game. I had such a good time.
Yeah, and also it's just like it was just such a hodgepodge of like kind of like you're able to kitchen sink that kind of
Mm-hmm.
a setting,
Yeah.
which is kind of like freeing. It's like everything fits here, so that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, with enough imagination, you can make anything work in fantasy. I mean, just there's just so many different like monsters and environments and spell effects and all sorts of things that you can play with.
Yeah, and I guess like with that game, like when we did our session 0, I presented a handful of threats that you guys could explore.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
Yeah, so one of them was the threat from the moon
Oh, okay.
itself with the lunar
The lunar
daemons,
demons. Oh, right.
and then and then also and then there was the idea of just trying to help the city survive, or it was like, oh, there's this impending
Oh,
threat
that's
of
interesting.
warlords.
So they were all sort of connected, but you just turned the dials on one or the other.
Yeah,
Like we could have just stayed in the city and like went out and scavenged stuff, tried to build things and whatnot.
And so
Okay,
like
that's cool.
the Marina the Merciless thing may have come in to that degree, or maybe it wouldn't have, depending on what happened in the game, right? Like
Right, right.
that game was a lot about like, yeah, this this bad guy is the threat, and it's the thing the players are thinking about. But it was more like also like how could I explore, the themes of the particular
Sure.
characters, right? With that short arc like that. So it was like I tried to take like 1 to 2
Masterful.
sessions to like experiment with each of the
Mm-hmm.
different different characters background a little bit and introduce some things from that.
Yeah. And in that game, as in, a lot of games, in my experience, I'm sure yours too, it's like players will just kind of add to your bad guy on their own, just for whether it's something they speculate they think about them or whatever, you know what I mean, or just filling in their own blanks of just like maybe they did this, like yeah, and then they just get convinced of it, like oh screw this bad guys.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, have you ever run it where like there is a bad guy that they're kind of gunning for, but like every time they run into anything in the game, they just blame it on them, whether it's connected or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, oh, you mean like the players do that?
Yeah,
Characters?
yeah, they
Oh,
just
right.
start like piling it on.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that happen occasionally as well. With my games too, like I mean, you've seen a little bit, and Ted's been playing with me for a long time, but I just throw a lot of different stuff out there and just
Mm-hmm.
see what the players
Well,
want to do with
that's
it.
that's kind of its own verisimilitude, if you will, too, and one that I enjoy playing in a lot because I it just feels like, well, you're a good DM or GM or whatever, and it's like, well, whatever, because it's like after playing so many games, like man, you have no idea what's going to happen once you start playing a game of D&D or any other game. It's like even if you had like an extensive session zero and did all the consent forms and made your characters together and had backstories, it's like, man, once you say like, okay, it's all bets are off. Like they might have no interest in, it could just be because like the way you described it just didn't sound interesting right off the bat. So, or something else sounded more interesting. And players really don't know what you expect them to do anyway. Like I remember a good example, that's our last game with Ted. I remember thinking like, boy, this race is wrapping up early. Like, are we like, and I was kind of
Yeah,
metagaming, but I was like, I know this goes till 10, so he must want us to do something else. So then I was like, okay, well, if it's over, then it's over. I'm sure he's got something else planned. And it's sort of like that with bad guys in games too, where it's just like they might, the players might just have some weird encounter with a rando NPC that like they feel like gave him a dirty look or whatever,
yeah.
and then that's becomes the bad guy. And you're like, that was just some dude like standing on the street corner or whatever.
Or it's always great when you can introduce them kind of early, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe not for the horrendous things they've been doing, but where the players just kind of start to get to know them, and then they realize like they've been lied to, they've been deceived the whole time,
Mm-hmm. Oh
and
yeah, that was my whole Spelljammer campaign was like that, and it fizzled out before they ever went back. I've told you this before. Like the guy, they inspired them, and they named their adventuring company after him, and everything
oh my god.
was actually Warduke who had like basically like defeated them roundly in like session one. Like that was like a hot start, and he
Yeah.
was whatever, but they never went back to that planet either. I kept trying to steer them back and just mentioning it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we should go there." Whatever. They
Yeah,
just
I
were
mean,
cruising around the galaxy in their
that
Viper
could be
ship.
tough, man. That could be tough. What when you're putting together your games, do you have a particular approach to it, or
To the bad guys,
yeah, like if you're running an
I really
overarching
don't.
yeah,
Honestly,
yeah,
it's more like per adventure thing. And
yeah,
like, I never expect that they're going to be ongoing, or maybe I'm just not very good at doing that. Like, there's a bad guys, per adventure, but it's like it's D&D, so it's like yeah, they're going to beat him in the fight. I mean, I'm pretty formulaic like that for the most part. So I really don't have any like long time bad guys that were like hounded characters too much.
I want to say like running stream games really does kind of make you better at that.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
At having ongoing things.
Well, in the sense that like most of the stream games I've been a part of, it's been like, we're gonna run for so many sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So as the GM, when you're confined to a 6-session arc, 12-session arc, you have to figure out how you're going to get from point A to point B in that a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely made it better, right? It made me better at doing that and introducing them, the concept earlier, and kind of like sticking to it. The Court of Worms game that I ran for Saber Dice, like I knew, like when I started coming up with the concepts that okay, there's this banished, fourth Dragon Emperor, and I want to do something with that, and
mm-hmm.
How am I going to make that happen? How do I get from them coming to this new place to wrapping up in session 6 with the reveal?
That's interesting. So I'll give you an example of my process. I just thought of this while you were talking, and I'm not sure. Like, so this is an approach to like bad guys for me. Because like I said, like those games I play with my friends, it's like we didn't have like we're gonna play this many times. We just played every Sunday and just kept that going. So I won't get into like the hook and everything, but there was like a gang, and I just totally lifted like the Black Earth cult, I think it's called, from Princes of the Apocalypse, and used like the map and everything, like that's their hideout and whatever. And they were at a planet and they had to do something, but there had been a murder there and the place was like locked down until it was solved. So of course they offered to help, and so like we played that for probably like I don't know 5 or 6 weeks in a row, of sessions of them like investigating and finding out what was going on and then going through their hideout, blah blah blah. And so by the time they chased down the final villain, who was like a monk and stuff, and it was really hard. They felt pretty satisfied, but it's like, is that so? I guess those were like bad guys. They just weren't like, I didn't set out to be like, these are going to be these intricate things. It's like, no, they just were interacting with them for a while, but then they roundly defeated all of them.
Well, sometimes you can start running a campaign and like the bad guys will stand up at some point and reveal themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my long running game, it wasn't until they hit level 5 or 6 that like, they already been into it before we decide, like before the big bad of the campaign had been decided on. And, it was just kind of like a series of events, where they went to they accomplished their first goal, which was to get back to the dragon realm so the Dragonborn can kind of go home. And in doing so, they established like a permanent portal, so now they could go back and forth. And then while they're there, they got attacked by Dragonborn Nazis, pretty much, who felt like they shouldn't be mingling with the lesser races.
Okay.
And I just like with that one, I just threw out like, oh, that's this esteemed general, and he's a hero amongst your people. And for whatever reason, the Dragonborn in the groups really latched onto that. And it was like this epic betrayal to them. And it were just like some offhand details that I kind of threw out there.
See, but they don't know that's the weird thing about RPGs. It's like we all talk about and get tips and suggestions, but the real weird thing is like nobody on either side of the screen knows those things. So like, when people talk about like the illusion of choice, like, well, it's BS if they go path A and path B and they just wind up at C either way. It's like, why? They don't know that. They have no idea that what was the other way because they didn't go that way, right? So with that, it's like they don't know that isn't meant to be an important NPC, even though you just made him up on the spot.
But then the players get excited and make that thing important,
right?
And
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Then they're like, oh, like so now we're off and running, and they want to track this like rogue this rogue, contingent of the army down, and then,
Mhm.
and then like this rogue contingent of the army summons these beings from another plane that are even more awful than they were,
Yeah.
and
And you could totally steer it right back to whatever ideas you had and just adapt them too, right? I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure
oh,
that way,
yeah.
like,
I mean,
okay,
you can
well, I'll just make the
absolutely,
bad guys Dragonborn then instead of orcs or whatever the heck they were gonna have.
do that, and like in that particular game,
Or use elements of that. I mean, stuff that you might have had in mind, like beats or plot points or whatever.
I hadn't run like a long-term D&D game in a while. It was my first one with 5A. So I kind of fell into my old habits of like happenstance amongst the players, and me just trying to weave everything together. Which
Oh,
is,
isn't that what you still do?
yes and no. Like now I put way more on the players
You
than I
put more
did in
on
the
the players. I
past.
see what you're saying.
Um, you know, with that, I just took like all the random bits they gave me and said, okay, let me weave these together. Like that was probably like the first session in the zero I did, and I got a lot out of doing the session zero, but I also got a lot more out of realizing how I could have did it better.
Sure. Oh yeah, of
Going
course.
forward,
You gained experience points.
I did gain experience points.
You leveled up.
You know. So real quick, I'll address this question in the chat. So Nicholas wants to know who's DMing the next Tuesday night game.
Nerder Dog is guiding the players through Quest RPG.
Which you're the only one that's played it so far. We're all noobs.
Yeah, I only played it the one time and read it, but it's so easy. And you guys are such awesome players that I'm confident that we will have a fun time playing it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a blast. I mean, this group is a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, I'm mostly have anxiety about just being able to keep up with, the players.
Yeah.
And and a lot of that, like to the point of the topic, it's like, I have like, ideas for people that are doing things, but it's like, for all I know, it's like even if it's during session zero, like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, like might not totally bite on it, so who knows what'll happen. Just got to roll with it,
figure it out. So I want to say Monster of the Week is really great for kind of like helping you flesh out your bad guy, your villains, or just a threat, right? Because sometimes it doesn't have to be like a person per se.
Sure.
It just be kind of a looming threat that's going to happen. And Monster of the Week, because the way they have this countdown, it's like I think it's like 6 different events that kind of happen, and essentially like when you come up with your adventures in there, it's like figure out your bad guy and what are they trying to do, and then you have the countdown and going, okay, at each phase of this countdown, what'll happen if the players do nothing?
Yeah, Tales from the Loop is like that too.
Yeah, so I that's like a super useful tool.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like that is, straight, couldn't be much more railroady, right? But because it's like baked into the rules, it's cool, right? Because it's like, well, that's the game you're playing. So like that's the tough thing with D&D. It's like that's not like the actual game system is not like that at all. It's just like sort of a pact, like, yeah, you're all gonna do what I expect, right? It's like, nope, they're not. Like, you thought of a million different things they can do, they're gonna do a different thing every time.
Well, with Monster of the Week, it's a very sandboxy game anyway.
Uh-huh.
So that like the plot is very linear.
Right.
But the way the game is set up is very sandboxy.
That's the conceit of the game. It's like you're playing a game where you're going to be, you're
going to solve mysteries,
right, involving a monster. Whereas like D&D, you're not. But the cool thing about D&D, the benefit to that is like, well, in the same way you're always trying to have like verisimilitude, and people talk about like, well, if they don't do it, like there's consequences. I guess I sort of have like a nebulous approach as a GM where it's like, yeah, there's probably somebody else that's going to handle it though. I mean, it's a big world. Like you think about even, the world we live in, it's just like, well, if I don't go out there and stop crime, who will? It's like, I don't know, a million other people. But like, it's not like the world's going to.
What's Elminster doing tonight?
Maybe I wonder. Do you think that comes from like being, I wouldn't say I'm far from like a grognard or anything, but like just we've talked about it with character death and all those sorts of things where it's like, I don't like when I'm playing. I like the characters I play, and I feel like they're special to me. But like I still understand, like they're just people living in a world. They're not like this.
Here's my take on that.
The one.
My take on that is, if the players don't do the thing, then there should be consequences. If the players will be vested in the consequences, like if they're no more vested in the consequences than the original thing, there's like they didn't tell you once, but they told you twice that like that's not
like if they didn't stop the lich, like, oh well, you hear that like hundreds of people were killed by the lich. It's like, okay, like we're gonna go do the we're gonna rescue these kittens though. That was actually a meme the other day. It was just like, the main plot, like kill the lich, and it was like the car steering off the freeway, and it was like save the kittens that are in danger. Of course, all the people in the comments are like, yeah, but then the lich, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, yeah, well, like you just said, I mean, to the point, it's like it's a fictional story. They didn't care about it the first time. They cared about saving the kittens, so that's what they're gonna go do.
Now, maybe if you have the let's show up and kidnap those kittens.
Right, there you go. And maybe that's what you're getting. It's like, I mean, there's tons of memes and jokes about it. Like what we thought it would be like, what it's really like. It's like, yeah, and it's both, right? It's like you can imagine that your guys are these awesome heroes, but they also just do goofy stuff, and there's liches that kidnap kittens and stuff.
Well, I mean, and also even just bringing
what's wrong with that? If that's the game that you play, and that's what the bad guys do, then and the players hate them.
Just bringing it back to the main topic too is like, well, why don't your players care about this thing, this threat or this bad guy? What do what's going on that they have complete lack of interest in it, and what are they interested in, and can you make those things intersect in your game?
Right. And you might have to break out of what you imagined it, right? That's like, I'm sure you had to do that with Mariana, and I've done that with villains and stuff too, where it's like, in your mind, like, yeah, there's this evil demonic nonsense. It's like, or maybe there's just some goofball lich that, holds kittens for ransom because he wants the players to like, find some magic item for him or whatever.
He's just like, no soul's purer than the soul of a kitten.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look at Mum Rise, a good example. I mean, it's just like, sure, he was evil, but he also did stupid crap all the time because it was a cartoon. Like, I can't think of anything off him. I'm sure he did some silly stuff for a guy that was empowered by the ancient spirits of evil, right?
And and that's just it. And it's just figuring out what silly things or evil things are you going to do with the villains in your game that are going to make your players want to go hunt them down and stop them from doing the thing.
Yeah, right. Another funny thing is like bad guys that maybe the players defeated, and then they just become recurring sort of like jokey sort of things. When I ran Ghost of Saltmarsh for my friends, when they were when they discovered, a spoiler alert, they're smugglers, it's not a haunted house. The gang down there, for some reason, I had just watched True Romance, so like the gang was like all the guys at Lee Dunowitz's house at the end. Like, I don't know if you ever watched that movie.
I'm not.
Oh, really? But they're and all the players I was playing with are, they know all those references too, and they just were cracking up. They love these guys. I mean, they hated them because they were, they fought them several times.
Yeah.
But like they tied them up and took a boat to go investigate something. And when they came back, they're like, I bet you they're going to be gone. I was like, they go up like, of course they're gone. They got away and stuff. So they just hated these guys. But those kind of bad guys are great because it's like, well, you can use them to like comment on things or touchstones, and the players know, we can beat them.
Yeah,
we already did, and especially if it's like much later and those bad guys haven't gained power. It's like, yeah, these guys are jokes. Was there a question in the chat?
There is a question in the chat. Did I have my looking at a question look on my face?
Yes. Do you have any tips for making the big bad a hard challenge but not overpowered? I feel like my bad guys always get wrecked immediately or dominate the players. I mean, man, it's all about having just a ton of stuff going on. I like to use the Mummy Lord as an example because on paper, everybody, it sucks, it's vulnerable to fire, blah, blah, blah. It's like got a lot of hit points. Those things are freaking awesome. Dude, what's that?
It's got like 3 hit points.
It's got 991 or something on average, but it's like it's like a CR 13 where it's like that's a fireball from Doom. Like one thing. But it's like their regional effects is like everything in like a mile radius can't like get a long rest or something. I mean, I don't know, don't quote me on that. But that's a huge area, and then it's like it's a lot of these things, the layers like the room they're in, it's layers like the entire dungeon. So it's like you can't heal in there, or it's like basically it's layer actions could just affect the players anytime they're walking down a hallway and stuff like that. Like necrotic energy might just come out of the wall and hit you. Just think big of like, oh, there's a great section in Tasha's about environmental hazards and like here's spells that you could just use the effects to simulate this and all those storms and all that. I mean, you're the DM, you can do whatever you want. You could just on the spot be like, I need everybody to make a Constitution saving throw because like poison gas comes up out of the ground. Just I know that sounds kind of BSy because it's like, well, you're just ratcheting it up like to challenge them. It's like, yeah, but again, they don't know that, and it's like, it's D&D. I mean, you want them to win, and I don't know, maybe that's too metagamey, and people would start hating me if I revealed how I often run games. Where it's like, yeah, when it just seems like it's a good time, they beat them. I mean, I have, I use their hit points and all that stuff, but it's more like
so I want to say
experience using dice as practice.
There's a couple things, right? Even though like I feel like every edition of D&D really tries to address this problem, and they've never been able to do it because the idea of being able to use one big bad that's super cool and takes on the whole party sounds like such a cool idea. But at the end of the day, you got 4 to 6 players. And inevitably, you're going to roll crappy on initiative. They're all going to go and do like 300 points of damage, and like your big bad.
Yeah, they figure out weird combos. It's like, if you cast Force Cage, then this guy casts Sickening Radiance. He'll just die from exhaustion in like 30 seconds. We'll just kick back and have mimosas and just watch him die and stuff or whatever.
So you have to think about things like that. You have to think about like what you brought up about hazards is a great idea. Or hazards, environmental effects, obstacles, so that they can't easily get to them.
Yeah,
and maybe the villain can move around easily, or having multiple opponents for them to square off against. Or
even weak, like even if you're like, I mean, there's always like the fireball, or you just torch hundreds of things, but like that's what's kind of good about Bonded Accuracy. It's the point, right? It's like it's gonna do something. Like if you're fighting, a CR, if you're fighting a Tiamat and there's like a couple of ogres, it's like they're gonna do something. They're gonna get in the way. They might hit you, drain a resource or something.
You got to put
other things going on.
You have to put things in the way that make your villain seem cooler. Right, during the fight, during the combat. So
yeah, just sell the sizzle too. I mean, just your words are powerful. I mean, if you're like, they don't know what's going on. If you're like, it just shrugs off your sword blow, even if it was like a huge like smite or something. It's like that could just, it's like, hey, hit points are an abstraction.
I will.
Got hit points. If you had 1 hit point, you're just as good as if you had 1,000.
I will throw out 50 skeletons, right, which will totally mess up the encounter ratio, because once you get to high numbers, it just doesn't mean anything.
Actually, I think there's a point though where it, like if you're so far, but it's just meaningless. Like it doesn't affect it anymore. I think, at least the thing in D&D Beyond, it's like I remember seeing somewhere it's just like it's irrelevant.
Oh, it does say trivia, but like once you add things to it, I think that
trivial.
changes.
Yeah, that's what it is. So I guess it is a level of difficulty,
But like the point is, right? Like, I did that because the real threat was going to be like, the I don't know what I used, the Cambion and a Nightmare or something along those lines. Like that was the main event. That was the main thing. But in the meantime, the cleric is like just dusting.
Yeah, it's a cool
15
moment.
Skeletons around, like it was nothing.
That feels awesome. If you're a high level cleric, it's just like You just hold up your symbol and they just turn to dust all around you.
But
Or
you know
whatever
what else
power
it
you
feels like
imagine.
as the GM? It feels like that cleric ain't doing nothing else that round.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure.
but doing that,
But
right?
it's a cool moment, you know.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
sell that sizzle. Oh, you know what? This is kind of related to your point though, with the difficulty thing. We ran into that working on encounters with the Winter Lord, for the Winter Lord, whatever it's called. Because we were like, oh, man, if there's enough skeletons for this to be, you know, to make to sell the moment, it would be like 100, you
Yeah,
know, for like
yeah.
a third level encounter. So it's like, just turn that into a hazard. It's like, well, what if there's just skeletal hands reaching out of the ground? It makes it difficult terrain, and you know
They might
they
take
got to
some
make a
damage.
saving throw. Maybe they'll grab you or something, you know, whatever. Or yeah, or
Yeah,
do.
like I didn't, and like you think about video games too sometimes, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I did an encounter where it was a spellcaster that was like in a dome of force, and they had all spells that were just line of sights, but they weren't line effects or like you didn't have to do it. You know, it didn't have to traverse through the wall of force.
Yeah.
So you know, if they had a way to bring down the wall of force, they could use disintegrate and drop it for a round. Use dispel magic and drop it for a round. But you know what I had was like these nodes, these columns that they had to destroy, and they had to do a certain amount of damage. And it was like each one had to take 100 points of damage, but there were 4 spots on them, so they couldn't just like pile on the whole thing at once because I know they could
Yeah.
do enough damage to just
Right.
obliterate it. They would have to divide up their attacks or whatever. But every time they took down one of those nodes, like the force field would come down for a round, and they could do something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there was like 4 of them, so they had to take all 4, you know, before they could actually get at the villain for more than like a round.
Yeah, that's similar to the epic bad guy encounter that we had at D&D in a castle for the finale. So if you want to, I mean, that's about as challenging as I've ever been involved with. So
Uh,
to Nicholas's point, was an undead elder brain that we homebrewed that was in its tank, which had a protective bubble that was protected by shield guardians, which had innocent NPCs that the PCs had come to like
come to know,
throughout the
yeah.
campaign in them, sucking their juice. So they were like powering it. And there was the nodes around. And then we had 18 players, adventurers involved
So
in that. So that was pretty challenging
I
to
think,
run. That
oh
was, I
yeah,
mean,
for
we
sure.
split it up. Ted were talking about this last week. All I did was the layer actions and legendary actions. That's it. And
And
track the
track the initiatives.
yeah, that's how it came up. But it
Please,
was
the
just
bookkeeping of
that
that
was
was
like
super
a hard
important.
job. Yeah.
The bookkeeping, that was the true villain of that, the true bad guy in that game.
Oh, it was fun though, trying to,
Yeah.
you know, because I had plenty of time to, you know, like observe and listen to what they were doing. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, like, well, the Elder Brain is reading all their thoughts, so it would know that too.
Yeah.
You know, what they're doing, what they're up planning and stuff as they advanced around the board. So yeah, like choosing what I was going to do was a lot of fun.
So to kind of like wrap up that question, it's like, how many things can you put in the way to be a pain in the ass for your players?
Mm-hmm.
Like
And give
those are
them
the
cool,
kind of things
but
that's
to
going to
your
help
point
your
about
bad guy last.
the dusting, and give them opportunities to do cool stuff.
Yes.
That isn't just like, you know, a war of attrition, swinging your sword every round or whatever, you know, an action surging or whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah,
Like they have to do other things.
You don't want it to feel trivial to them. Like they should feel like they're accomplishing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, or even if you threw ogres in there, if you're like a 20th level fighter, it's like, hell yeah, you get to like go to town and like carve through like 6 ogres in a round or something. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, they're also, you know, I think another thing that makes your bad guys seem way cooler is minions from 4th edition, where you know, if they fail a saving throw, they die. If they take 1 point of damage from an attack, they die. If they pass a saving throw against anything, it has no effect on them.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I feel like, you know, they're always cool to litter the battlefield with, because one,
sure. for
you know,
any class, archers. You
oh
can
yeah,
do tons of targets. That's fun as heck.
and
Fighters, spellcasters.
they're still a threat. They're still effective, but they kind of drop easy, and it's a
How would you
problem.
rule
And
sleep? I guess would be fun as hell too, because technically there's no save and they only have 1 hit point, so you could get a hell of a lot of. That would be fun as hell if you're like that kind of wizard. I mean, it's like
yeah,
that's their version of a fireball of taking
I
out 30
think
guys. Like I just made 45 ogres, just boom, fell asleep.
I think you just came up with the nemesis for minions from 4E because that
There had to be some interaction there, right?
well no there was no mechanic for that because in 5e that like that's
the player's handbook for the best edition of D&D.
I feel like everything there was like an attack roll or a saving throw, where here it's just like, no, you're just going to do hit points worth of effect.
Yeah.
That's kind of a 5e thing. That's one of the few things that they added.
No, that's how it worked in earlier editions. Sleep. That's always how it's worked. There was always a hit point. It was probably like hit dice worth of it. Like
Was it? I don't know. I don't remember now.
I'm almost positive.
I thought, man, I feel like it was a saving throw. I have my 3rd edition books around here someplace.
Sleep in 4th edition, the best edition of D&D, is an area burst within 20 squares. All the creatures, they do get a save, intelligence versus will, and if they're hit, they're slowed.
Yeah.
And then if they fail, even if they're just slowed, period. And if they fail, they're unconscious. So that's a hell of a lot.
Yeah, that's a much better sleep spell. I feel like in earlier editions there was probably a saving throw.
I don't think there was. Like, I want to say it was probably like hit dice or something, like blah, 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 hit dice worth of creatures falls asleep. Like in 1st edition AD&D, maybe 2nd also.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Are you looking it up?
I am.
But yeah, I mean, the thing about to circle back around to bad guys, it's like, we've kind of broadly talked about
will and negates.
What's that?
Will and negates.
For what?
Sleep.
What? 3rd edition?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of 1st and 2nd. But yeah, just paying attention to who characters and players come to dislike can be bad guys, or just adapting your bad guy. I mean, the same way that you might adapt like a map or a dungeon into, that you don't come up with yourself into your campaign. It's like, well, you can kind of mold your existing bad guy. I mean, like, like I said, with Ghost of Saltmarsh, I mean, those smugglers, like, they're not, nice people. And they weren't my game either, but they're certainly not like kind of slapsticky, bumbling criminals like they turned out to be. And, maybe your lich ends up being a cat napper, in your campaign for all, instead of the soul sucking, entity thirsting for immortal power.
Or or it just ends up going in a different direction altogether.
Yeah. Your sorceress warlord might end up becoming a mocked. We got over the whisper campaign.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
She even called herself that one time. I think
that's canon.
That in canon. Yeah. She called herself.
It was a Freudian slip.
Yep, we were in her head.
Now, do you have a preference
for? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you have a preference for what kind of bad guys you use? Do you have a type when it comes to bad guys?
You mean other than the plants, oozes, and undead that I normally like? It's because there's no bargaining with them. Humanoids are kind of probably fantastical things like bigger monsters that are like intelligent monsters and things that would have plots and plans. Like humanoid.
You got to build that game around those things, and you got to make the ooze your big bad.
It's 3 blacks. It's like, nope, it's the blob. That's the great enemy. It's like there's no reasoning with it. It's like the Terminator too.
Yeah.
Can't be reasoned with or bargained with, and it won't stop until you're dead.
Until at least a few movies, and then they start
right
humanizing him a bit more. How else are you going to get
But
your
yeah,
big
I don't know.
budget
I guess
actor?
I'm pretty trepidatious about committing to like plot points or stuff when I'm GMing,
Yeah.
when I'm planning a game, even with their upcoming Ingest Quest 2. It's like I'm just trying to think of like scenarios to put you guys in. It's like I don't know. I mean, I'm just praying, like, please at least buy into that part. Like, just you're good, you know. Like, here's the challenge for this episode. I don't care how you do it, but
We shall see. You know how
yeah.
players can be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's that. Right. Those are just my peculiar DM anxiety.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know.
but yeah,
Robin does like to. Robin likes to interact with your monsters
true.
at a more personal level. But I've found ways to have fun with that as well. I mean, like you put forth these monsters or villains, the bad guys that they're supposed to interact with, and then they don't do what you expect them to.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of squashing that, I like to let them do it.
Oh yeah, I'm just worried that I'd be able to like keep up with the players.
Well,
That's
so
my
like
anxiety.
the cure to that is that it works until it doesn't. Right. And so like you reward them for doing these different things by allowing it to work some of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But other times they try it and the monster tries and eats their face. I knew with the Scarlet Sisterhood group, like they'd already done a little bit of that and befriended, or converted an ogre and brought him in for his punishment, and they were trying to reason with troglodytes, and there had some successes, but then
I guess we did that in Robin's game though too, with those ogres that were in that dragon's lair. And
was it the ogres, like, or are you thinking the elemental earth tufts?
Oh, those two. No, remember there was those ogres, and they came all the way back with us, and they became like city guards.
Yeah, we got them uniforms.
Yeah, so. The earth elemental tufts they cut out on us. They left.
Yeah, well, that's just like that's part of it, right? Where you're like, oh man, we got these guys on our side. We did the thing. And it's funny, you're the one that's like, I use these monsters so they don't try and befriend them. But you're the one that was like wholly vested in
yeah, that's true. Tops. Well, that's why I like being a player more than DM.
Yeah.
I am that guy. I am that player that's going to do this.
But, like I said, with the Scarlet Sisterhood game, I knew when I threw this encounter at them where it was like this wagon where this family got massacred.
Mm-hmm.
And I used like a shadow or a wraith or some kind of incorporeal undead.
Oh yeah, it was wraith.
And made it the baby, right? Because I knew like they were going to absolutely try and reason with it, right, and do something. But at that point, it was just like evil incarnate, and it was just going to try and eat their face, and it was going to like really kind of mess with them, psychologically.
I guess I'd say one thing that we kind of like haven't crystallized, but we've kind of talked about is just knowing like who the bad guys are, like what they want or whatever. Like any NPC, that just goes a long way. Where you're like, yeah, sometimes they might go along with the players' silly things, or like talk with them, and then other times they might just be like, you guys are ridiculous. It's like, so just knowing who they are is. And and it's more important than like what they're doing, I guess, all the time.
And also, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of customizing them and catering to your players, right? Like, if you have a group of players that you're familiar with and you kind of know how to push their buttons, like, run with a villain that's already got those buttons pre-pushed. Mm-hmm. So to try and get them emotionally invested in it in a way.
Dungeons and Delving was interesting. There was really no villain per se. I mean, there was whoever was.
There was a mystery.
There was a mystery, but it's like we were winning most of the time, and so both me and my character weren't invested in that part of the campaign as much, which is totally fine. I still had an awesome time playing the game.
Yeah.
But even then it's like, well, it wasn't really affecting us though. Like there was bad guys up to bad stuff, but we were like number 1 or 2 the whole time. So I was like, whatever, man. I
No,
don't care.
we were only number one at the very end.
Yeah, but
Before
we were
that,
like number 2
we
for
were
a
at
while.
like two. We kept wobbling between 2 and 3. I don't know if we dipped down to 4 or not.
Well, I really just took to like I didn't really grasp that it was like modern day or futuristic setting until we
Yeah,
started playing. So like and this has happened to me with a lot of characters actually in games where it's like I feel like, oh yeah, they're coming like they're a Dwargar or somewhere. It's like they had a crummy, a harsh life, and it's like this is awesome compared to whatever I used to do. It's like we get pampered here, and just applying that sort of like modern day thinking where it's like, well, we don't have to win. I'm still going to be famous, so I could get
yeah.
like wealth and all those things just from like doing deals with people and stuff. So I loved that part of the game of like the
Well,
betrayal.
all the reasons why people do reality shows to begin with.
Yeah. But originally I came for the chat. I was like, I don't care about that. I just want to do like the dungeon delves and like that
Yeah.
sounds fun. I
Did
was
you
like,
ever see? Did
hopefully
you ever see that like Stanley did a really cheesy reality show where the winner they were going to turn into a superhero comic and
was
like
it like they a bunch of people lived in a house and like they had to do heroic things and
they had
stuff like
tasks
that?
and like like
Yeah,
there was
yeah,
a
I've
plot
seen it.
twist where one of the characters was like, "You're a terrible hero," and he turns him into one of the villains.
Oh, and yeah, I remember the show. I don't remember
Yeah,
the
yeah. And there was like one person, and like they were like during like the stuff they're doing, they're kind of like out and about, and they're like, and I guess there was a
Oh
guy that
man.
she was talking to,
Mhm.
and then he's like, "Well, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, I just want to be an actress, so I'm doing this thing." I feel like I feel like that's what a lot of it is anyway. Uh, but she just kind of got caught on camera saying the quiet parts out loud.
What we didn't even talk about was the opposite of like what is the players being bad guys.
I don't
Because
even. Yeah,
just as all bad guys are heroes of their own story, a lot of heroes are the bad guys of somebody else's story. Whether they be the people like much like superheroes who leave destruction in their wake or seem to attract bad guys or danger at least, whether it's in a small town or a big city.
we've definitely talked about that in videos in the past,
Mm-hmm.
where like the idea of having NPCs that the players have encountered before, where they end up turning to a life of crime because of the circumstances that were
Yeah,
created in the aftermath of the players that
yeah.
they never thought
They,
about
they
again.
they might be antagonists hunting the players down. Like, man, you came through my town, and like, oh yeah, remember when you stopped that evil necromancer by like laying waste to my entire village and just
When you dumped all that treasure in our town and drove inflation way up.
after fireballing in the town square
Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah,
it
yeah. So
happens, man. It happens. Yeah. So no, also like the other thing is to actually playing the bad guys and being villains, which I just don't like those kinds of games
yeah,
anymore.
that's another thing too. I think about that all the time. A lot of times in the comments on our Facebook memes, there'll be like, silly, like, oh, you're like, just fantastical D&D ways to like torture people or whatever. That's like a joke meme. And I'm always like, oh yeah, that's gruesome. And then people are like, oh, well, we do way worse than that in our games. And I'm like, Jesus, man! Like people are like the real bad guys are the people playing these games. It's like, oh my god,
There's two
somebody,
types of people: the person that plays D&D and RPGs to escape the terribleness that is the world, and the people that want to
who want to
really
make them,
be the
yeah,
terribleness in the world, and they're trying to do it in the games.
yes, yeah. And to your point, it's like my when I guess maybe that's. I mean, I don't know, this sounds like a humble brag, but like maybe that's why it's difficult for us to or at least for me to have like truly like despicable epic villains because it's like I don't want to think like that. I mean, I don't want to have people that do those, especially like I said, relative to a lot of the D&D player base. It's like I don't even like, I'm squeamish, man. I don't even like
Yeah,
slasher movies, so stuff
I
like that. So my villains are not, I guess that's why I don't get into like demons and stuff because in my mind, like as antagonists,
uh,
I know this would be terrible. Like, there's no like, oh, they're just silly demons. It's like, no, they like slake their thirst with like your dismembered limbs, blood, and stuff. Like, I don't want to play games like that. It just sounds disgusting and gruesome. That's not fun to me.
Well, they are far more absolute bad than the oozes.
Yes, right. Yeah, oozes just want to roll over you and dissolve you. That's all.
It's a goo.
And maybe there's a demon lord behind it all.
Well, I don't know. So like with the Monster of the Week game, I'm trying to find the right balance with things. And the first session was they had to basically confront the Jersey Devil, and like the Jersey Devil was taking the hearts of campers, virgins, which they figured out eventually, and he needed 13 of them. And when it would get them, it would then leave them on the stoop of their intended, right? Of someone that they're trying to woo. And then, the culmination was to enact a ritual using those 13 hearts. And then she was going to conceive the child of the Jersey Devil. So later on, we could eventually do a spawn of, if they failed, right?
The return of the curse of the legend of the spawn of the Jersey Devil.
Yeah. So they interrupted the ceremony at a point, but they don't actually know which point. So what they had to do in order to defeat the Jersey Devil was they had to break the jars with the hearts in them before they could actually harm the Jersey Devil. And when they broke the last of them, like the floor opened up and the ground opened up, and he was sucked into hellfire along with his intended. And, they slid off, and then everything closed
so
back
it's
up.
clearly like a terrible monster thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't have like a sad story of a tale of woe to tell.
No. I mean, maybe if they delved, they'd be like they would have realized that this lonely like camp manager, kind of got seduced by the dark powers or whatever.
Oh,
but
kind of okay. That's interesting.
But no, she was like a totally willing accomplice, and like it was funny too because up until the very end, they were like, "Oh no, we have to rescue this person," and then they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, they're working with the Jersey Devil."
Hey, you want a fun bad guy? People listening, go over to the Nerdarchy, the website, and look up Spring-Heeled Jack. Is that guy's name?
There is a Spring-Heeled Jack.
Yeah, there's the video you guys did, and there's a pretty good post along with it.
No, it's not Spring-Heeled Jack. That it is something else, Jack. Because it has to do with the Jack.
Stingy Jack.
It has to do with the
It's Stingy Jack, I think.
It has to do with the whatchamacallit, the jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah, it's Stingy Jack. I just looked it up.
Yeah, that was kind of fun to do.
He's a fun bad guy and a great little bit of folklore.
Yeah, How I Got My Powers was the video.
Yeah, it's in there, and then I made his turnip into a sentient magic item called Stingy Jack.
Yeah. We got a lot of flack about not talking about the turnip and talking about a pumpkin instead.
Yeah.
Interwebs. What are you going to do, man?
Yep. What can you do?
So it is just past that time. And we will not be back tomorrow night with our Tuesday night game. We're taking the week off, or 2 weeks off. That's correct.
Yeah.
Taking 2 weeks off. One of them will be doing our session 0, and then we're going to have a week off, and then we'll be back with Ingest Quest 2. Is that the plan? Is that what you're calling it?
Huh?
Is that what you're calling it? Ingest Quest 2?
Yeah. It's more like a spiritual successor, but with some common elements. It's not like,
so is it going to be the same kind of Spelljammer theme?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's still space and food and silly monsters.
So Spelljammer and food, that is going to be the theme of the next game. And there's definitely some silly characters that have come up that have been made for it, as well as we have one carryover character from the original Ingest Quest, so you'll be able to check that out.
Yes.
And then, obviously come back.
The internet's number one food fantasy D&D campaign.
Don't worry, we have lots of other videos and articles you can read and watch and listen to in the meantime. And of course, we'll be back. We'll be back here tomorrow at noon, or I'll be back here tomorrow at noon with another guest. So come listen to us chat about D&D, RPGs, and whatever else may come up. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy. Nailed it.